When Disney first took over for Star Wars, there was some excitement for what direction they would go in. What would the films look like and what games would we be playing? They signed an exclusive deal with EA, which meant that EA was the only publisher that had the rights to make new Star Wars titles. Sadly, interesting original projects were cancelled that were in development because of this deal, like Star Wars 1313. Many gamers were suspicious of this considering how EA can be, but maybe this would have been a good opportunity to go back to the better years of EA, where they provided us original titles like Dead Space and made great movie licensed titles like the Lord of the Rings and Bond games. EA decided to have DICE helm a new Battlefront title, and with the original two games being inspired by Battlefield along with DICE being the makers of it, this seemed like a good fit. EA's Battlefront had a bit of a mixed launch. It lacked many of the expected modes that veterans expected to see, like bot support and galactic conquest. There was no form of a campaign, and most of the single-player content was lackluster. The multiplayer was pretty good casual fun and really came into its own with the DLC, but sadly it was paid, so it only worked to fragment the online community. Sadly, as new films continued to release, it was obvious that most of these new films did not feel planned or thought out, and in some ways it felt that way with the new games too. In the span of 5 years, EA only published 4 new games. This might even be an impressive number from a developer to make 4 new titles, but for a publisher with the only keys to this license, it seemed kinda low. But if the quality was there, then each one would feel special. EA's Battlefront 2 launched in a bad state with issues from a lack of modes, poor writing in the campaign, and a borderline predatory monetization system tied to your progression. Now this game does have a rather good redemption story, but out of the gate, it wasn't good. Jedi Fallen Order was the third title, and many rather enjoyed this one. Fun gameplay and a good original Star Wars story. Lastly, Squadrons was their final title, and it didn't set the world on fire, and while it was fun, it had much of the same writing problems as Battlefront 2's campaign. There were some good moments in EA's run, but overall they disappointed and they really botched a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So with that, the contract ended, and Disney was interested in other projects with new developers, and I thought it would be a good time to discuss some of that today. Sources seem to suggest that Disney is interested in releasing a new Star Wars game every 6 months. This appears to be centered around one major AAA title and a smaller one. Now there is a set of new Star Wars games in development, but there isn't much known about them outside of the studios involved and the genre of the game. Amy Hennig, the developer responsible for the great Uncharted series, is attached to one project. Respawn is attached to 3 with a Jedi Fallen Order sequel, an FPS, and a strategy game of some kind. Massive Entertainment, the developers behind Division 1 and 2, are making an open-world game. Quantic Dream is making a heavy, narratively driven experience. And Saber Interactive is currently behind the KOTOR remake after Aspyr is no longer attached. This honestly is a promising bunch of titles. Amy Hennig is an industry legend with her work on the Legacy of Kain series along with the Uncharted games. She was working on Uncharted 4 and left Naughty Dog during the development of it. Rumor is that she and some of the other creatives disagreed a lot, and there's a lot of NDAs surrounding this, so we may never know the true reason for her leaving. But considering there was a decent exodus of Naughty Dog vets after Uncharted 4, it seems that maybe there was some reshuffling going on at Naughty Dog. But either way, this meant that Amy could go out and do other things. I really enjoy her character writing a lot from the Uncharted games, and I would love to see her tackle something in Star Wars and give us a memorable story and cast. Usually when her name is attached to something, I want to see what the end product will end up being. Respawn seems to have their hands full when it comes to Star Wars titles. I'm hoping that for their Jedi sequel they're able to improve on what they started with Fallen Order. The first game was good, with a solid cast and overall enjoyable story. It was like a mixture of a Souls game with the recent run of Tomb Raider titles for the exploration. In some cases I didn't feel like it mixed well all the time, where I didn't mind respawning enemies in a Souls game when you hit a save point, as this can be a good way to grind. Progression was gated and unlocked at set points in Jedi, so I found going back to old areas to be tedious, where I should want to find everything. And while I wouldn't want this to turn into some form of a loot-based game, I think there needs to be better collectibles and items to find than what there was. All areas that could be improved for the sequel. I just hope that they lean a bit more into the dismemberment side of things. Star Wars shouldn't be M-rated with over-the-top blood, but it should be a bit more liberal with the helmets, legs, and arms coming off, like in the Jedi Knight games, and they were still rated teen. Now I am very excited for Massive and their open world title. I absolutely love both of their Division games. When it comes to third-person shooting, you really can't beat these games. The movement feels great, the shooting feels great, and I'm always being pulled back into them. While I love both, I prefer the first and love the winter setting. I hope their Star Wars game has a few different environments, or maybe even planets, because they did a wonderful job with winter in New York City, and I think they could do something really cool with Hoth. If I had to guess, Massive was probably working on the Division 3, and that engine and template will be used for the new Star Wars game. So if their game is just the Division mechanics with Star Wars weapons and equipment, I'm all in. Now while the Division is a mix of an open world and live service type game, I would rather see this Star Wars game be more of an open world only type of game, with less or none of the live service elements. I want a full game from the outset, maybe with optional drop-in co-op. I am curious if this will be one location explored thoroughly, or if we'll have access to a set of planets, each acting like mini open worlds. Either way, I know that Ubisoft likes to try and stretch some of their open world games into being big, sometimes too big where they feel drawn out. I would prefer that they go for dense and highly detailed over just making it bloated. When it comes to Quantic Dream, I generally enjoy their games. The writing in them can be a bit silly at times, and the main creator can be very pretentious, but I always find their stories entertaining. Detroit Become Human I think is one of the best that they have to offer, and I think much of that is owed to the game having a co-writer to help funnel much of David Cage's ideas. A choice-based story experience set in Star Wars is promising either way. They apparently want to include more gameplay elements, so I wonder what those will be. And lastly, the Knights of the Old Republic remake seems to already be in trouble, as it now has changed hands on who is developing it. And there was some questionable stuff said by some of the prior writers who are thankfully not on the project anymore. I am going to be in an odd camp on this one. KOTOR does not need a remake. The game still plays great, it generally looks good, if a little dated in spots, and most importantly, the story has aged like fine wine. I do not want a modern day writer touching this story. Changes would only act as a means to ruin it. For people that call the gameplay dated, I say that you need to play more older style computer-based RPGs of this kind. It's a style preference. Now I do think that KOTOR would be great to come back in the form of a sequel, or if they really want to remake KOTOR, then just give us a visual remake and keep the mechanics and story untouched. We kind of know that these will probably be the AAA games, but what will the smaller titles be? My hope is that this does not include mobile titles, as those are generally a waste of time. But one thing that I hope to see is older Star Wars titles being remastered and re-released on modern consoles. Aspire's porting team has done a decent job of bringing many of those older classics back. They had their hands in Episode 1 Pod Racer, Republic Commando, and even the Jedi Knight games. These remasters show that many of these titles have aged very well, and point out how well made they were to begin with. I would love to see some of the smaller titles be more of these games. One title should be Star Wars Clone Wars. This was the first Star Wars game made by Pandemic before Battlefront. It was mainly a vehicle-based shooter that let players experience the finale of Episode 2, along with seeing what happens after it. And lastly, I would love to see 3 other titles come back with the Rogue Squadron trilogy. These games were and remain some of the finest for Star Wars. But all of this is currently just speculation and wishful thinking. My only hope is that with the push to release more games, the quality is not something that is suffered for it. What are your thoughts on the related Star Wars news? Are there any Star Wars games you're looking forward to? What old favorites would you like to play again? And let me know in the comments below. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.